The first thing Nora heard inside the ruined mill was not the wind. It was a faint ticking sound from the dark row of seed bins, like fingernails tapping from behind the wood. She stood in the doorway with one hand on her swollen belly and the other around the handle of a broom, wondering if $7 had bought her shelter or a place no one else was brave enough to enter. Outside, the town was turning brown. Wells coughed mud. Corn curled in the fields. Men who had once stood tall in church now lowered their eyes when the banker passed. But inside the mill, under layers of dust and husks, something had been carefully kept from the air. Nora found it by accident when a loose board gave way beneath her boot. Her knee hit the floor. Pain flashed through her body. Then, she saw the hollow space under the bin, lined with oilcloth and packed with small linen bundles. One bundle split open in her palm. Dry kernels rolled across the floor. Dark, hard, and strangely heavy. She should have thrown them away. Instead, she remembered her grandmother's warning. Dead seed rattles, living seed waits. Behind her, someone tried the locked door. Nora did not scream. The sound at the door came again, soft at first, then harder. The iron latch lifting and dropping, as if the person outside believed the mill still belonged to anyone but her. Nora closed her fist around the split bundle of kernels, shoved it inside the small cloth pouch beneath her coat, and swept the rest of the loose seed under the shadow of the bin with her boot. "Who's there?" she called. A man's voice came through the boards. "Bank sent me." Nora tightened her grip on the broom handle. It was not much of a weapon, but it was the only thing in the room long enough to keep distance between her and the door. "This property was sold," she said. "I have the paper. Didn't say you didn't." The latch rattled again. "Mr. Voss wants the condition checked." At the name, the child inside her shifted. Caleb Voss owned the bank, the auction yard, and half the silence in Cedar Plain. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Men lowered theirs when he entered a room. Even the sheriff smiled at him before he checked who else was watching. Nora had seen that smile 2 mornings earlier, when the landlord set her suitcase outside the boarding house and would not meet her eyes. "I've got no quarrel with you, Nora," he had muttered. "But the bank don't like risk. A woman in your condition brings questions. Questions bring inspectors. Inspectors bring trouble." Nora had not begged. Begging was a bowl with no bottom. She had picked up her suitcase and walked away with $7 sewn into the hem of her coat. $7, 1 tin cup, 1 blanket, and the small seed pouch her grandmother had left her years before. That pouch now pressed against her ribs, warm from her skin. Inside it, beside the kernels from the hidden bundle, lay 3 old bean seeds, 2 grains of corn, and a pinch of clover wrapped in paper. They were not enough to plant a meal. They were only memory. Her grandmother had called them last witnesses. A seed could tell the truth, the old woman used to say, but only if your hand was patient enough to listen. Nora had learned young how to listen. She knew dead seed by the empty click it made against a bowl. She knew living seed by its weight, by the faint oil smell under the husk, by the way a hard shell could still hold a quiet center. Good seed did not need to look pretty. It needed to keep its promise. The man outside struck the door once with the heel of his hand. "Open up. I only need to see the north bin." Nora stopped breathing. Not the mill. Not the roof. Not the broken wheel. The north bin. She turned her head slowly toward the dark row of wooden bins, toward the one with the loose board and the hollow space beneath it. "How would you know which bin to see?" she asked. The pause outside was small, but it was enough. "Old inspection notes," the man said. Nora had been hungry enough to believe lies before. Daniel Witt had taught her that. Daniel had promised her a wedding by spring, then vanished before the first hard wind stripped the fields. His mother had sent back Nora's letter unopened, except for one line written across the outside in narrow black ink. "We do not accept claims made by desperate girls." After that, the town stopped looking at her face. They looked at her belly, then away. Now, someone from the bank was standing outside a mill she had owned for less than an hour, asking for the one bin that had hidden seed under its floor. "No," Nora said. The word surprised even her. It came out thin, but it came out straight. The latch stilled. "You ought to be careful," the man said. A place like this is full of hazards. A lady could fall. A lady could lose what she's carrying. The broom handle creaked in her grip. Fear ran cold through her, but beneath it, something steadier took root. The world had been calling her careless, ruined, and foolish for so long that danger almost sounded like another name. But this place had given her a locked door, and under that door, it had given her a question. She would not hand over either one to the first man who asked. "I bought it," she said. "Tell Mr. Voss he can read the deed if he has forgotten." The man did not answer right away. Then his boots shifted on the step, boards groaning under his weight. "You'll wish you had taken help when it was offered." His footsteps crossed the porch. 1, 2, 3. Then, the outer door scraped as he left it open to the wind. Nora waited until she could no longer hear him. Only then did she slide the beam away and look through the crack. The yard was empty, except for drifting dust and the long shadow of the broken loading chute. She shut the door, dropped the beam back into place, and leaned her forehead against the wood until the child settled. Her hands were shaking now. She let them shake. Then she turned toward the north bin. The split bundle still lay where she had shoved it, half hidden beneath chaff. She knelt carefully, gathered every kernel she could find, and placed them in her grandmother's pouch. One seed had rolled farther than the rest, stopping beside a print in the dust. Nora froze. It was not hers. A man's boot mark crossed the floor from the rear wall to the north bin, then vanished near the locked back room. Whoever had tried the door had come too late. Someone else had already been inside. By morning, the mill had taught Nora 3 things. The roof leaked over the weighing room. The back door had been nailed shut from the inside. And whoever had crossed the floor before her had known how to avoid the soft boards. She woke before sunrise because cold water struck her cheek. Rain had found a hole in the roof and dripped through the dark, landing beside her blanket, then on it, then on her. For one foolish second, she almost laughed. The whole town was praying for water, and the only place it seemed willing to fall was through the ceiling over a pregnant woman with no bed. Then her stomach tightened. Nora sat up slowly, one hand against the floor, the other beneath her ribs. The pain passed, but it left fear behind. She had eaten half a biscuit the day before, and nothing since. The tin cup held 2 inches of rainwater and a dead moth. She cleaned it with her sleeve and drank anyway. A person could be proud after she was fed. The auction had happened only yesterday. Nora could still see the yard. Wagons in a half circle, men chewing tobacco under gray hats, women pretending not to stare at her belly. The auctioneer had raised one hand toward the seed mill ledger and tried not to smile. $7? No one answered. 6? Someone in the back laughed. Ask the girl. She looks like she needs a ruin. The words moved through the crowd like wind through dry corn. Useless girl. Useless building. A fine match. Nora had lifted her chin and said, 7. Caleb Voss, standing near the fence in his black coat, had watched her with a mild expression, the way a man might watch a mouse choose the trap with the cleanest door. Sold, the auctioneer said. Now the sold thing was dripping on her blanket, and Nora owned every broken inch of it. She spent the morning making the place less likely to kill her. She dragged empty sacks beneath the roof hole to catch water. She swept droppings away from the corner where she slept. She stacked loose boards against the rear wall and marked the rotten ones with charcoal. Every few minutes, her eyes returned to the boot print near the locked back room. It was still there. So was the question. Near noon, hoofbeats stopped outside. Nora took her broom before she opened the door. Caleb Voss stood on the threshold with his hat in both hands, his boots clean despite the mud. Behind him waited the same man who had come the night before, pretending to study the loading chute. Miss Ellis, Caleb said. I hope I am not intruding. You are. His smile did not move. Then, I will be brief. I heard one of my men came by too late last evening. Overzealous. My apologies. Nora said nothing. Caleb glanced past her into the mill. Not at the sagging roof. Not at the broken scale. His gaze moved once toward the bins on the north wall. I came to offer help, he said. This is no place for a woman in your condition. My condition is not for sale. No. But the property might be. He drew a folded paper from his coat. You paid $7. I can give you 35 today. Cash. Enough for a clean room, a doctor, perhaps passage to relatives. I have no relatives expecting me. Then all the more reason to accept. His voice was gentle. That made it worse. Nora had learned that harsh men wanted obedience, but gentle men wanted gratitude for taking it. What do you want with a dead mill? She asked. Caleb lowered his eyes to the paper. The bank prefers to clear old liabilities. Structures like this invite injury. Injury invites claims. That sounds like concern. I am a concerned man. For yourself? For the first time, the man behind him looked up. Caleb only smiled again. You have a sharp tongue for someone who needs friends. I had friends when I had something they wanted less. He unfolded the paper and held it where she could see the county seal, the bank stamp, and her own name written in a clerk's hand, though she had never stood before that clerk. This is not a threat, he said. Only a reminder. The mill was part of a repossessed agricultural property. Certain materials found within such property may be subject to prior claim. Nora kept her face still. What materials? Equipment, records, stock. His eyes lifted. Any agricultural material of value. The seed pouch beneath her coat seemed suddenly heavy enough to drag her through the floor. I found dust, she said. Then you lose nothing by signing. He offered a second page. She saw a line near the bottom, written in narrow legal print. Transfer of structure, fixtures, contents, residual stock, and all associated materials. Contents, residual stock, all associated materials. The baby moved, slow and hard, as if warning her from inside. No, Nora said. Caleb's smile thinned. Pride is expensive. So is being rescued by men who write small. A flicker passed across his face. Not anger exactly. Recognition. He folded the papers and tied them with brown twine from his pocket. Nora watched his fingers make the knot. Twice around, crossed left over right, then pulled tight with the thumb. She had seen that knot before. When Caleb left, he did not slam the door. He was too careful for that. He tipped his hat and said, "Think before nightfall. A child deserves shelter better than stubbornness." The hoofbeats faded. Nora stood still until the mill seemed to breathe again. Then she went to the north bin, opened her grandmother's pouch, and removed the third linen bundle she had not dared examine in the dark. Its mouth was tied with brown twine. Twice around, crossed left over right, pulled tight with the thumb. Nora did not untie the brown twine right away. She set the bundle on the scale table and stared at it until the mill's shadows shortened across the floor. Hunger told her to open it. Fear told her to burn it. Her grandmother's voice, older than both, told her a knot was a sentence. Read it before you cut it. So Nora read what she could. The twine was newer than the linen, not weathered, not stained with seed dust. The knot had been made by a clerk's hand, not a farmer's. The bundle smelled of ash and dry earth, but the twine smelled faintly of ink. She took her dull knife and slipped it under the cord without slicing the cloth. Inside lay another handful of hard, dark kernels, and beneath them a folded scrap of paper. Only 3 words had survived the damp. Hold until rain. Nora sat back on her heels. Outside, the town had been waiting for rain for months. Inside this dead mill, someone had written as if rain were not a prayer, but an instruction. That was when Nora stopped treating the place like shelter and started treating it like a witness. She found an old flour sack, tore it into strips, and tied one strip around each bin she had searched. The north bin received 2 knots. The bin beside it had been swept clean long ago, but its lid was nailed from underneath. Nora ran her fingertips along the edge and felt nail points bent back into the wood from inside the chamber. No one nailed a bin shut from the inside, unless they were hiding something from the person who would open it later. She moved slowly because the baby punished haste. Every bend pulled at her back. Every lifted board sent dust into her throat. But work steadied her. One board, then another. One question, then the next. By late afternoon, she had mapped the front room with charcoal marks on the wall. Rotten floor, loose plank, mouse hole, good beam. Strange nail. Boot print. The rear door bothered her most. It had been hammered shut with 3 thick nails, all driven from the inside. A door sealed that way was not meant to keep strangers out. It was meant to keep someone from being followed. Nora pressed her ear to it. The room beyond gave back no sound except the dull settling of old wood. She could not force it yet. Not alone. Not hungry. Not with a child turning inside her like a small fist against a closed world. So she turned to the machinery. The seed cleaner stood in the middle of the mill, taller than Nora, its iron wheels furred with rust, and its wooden chutes clogged with husks. A faded company name curved across the side, nearly lost beneath grime. Most people would have seen scrap. Nora saw absence. The main belt was gone. Not broken, gone, cut clean from its pulleys and removed, leaving the machine to look dead without being dead. She found a strip of old harness leather by the weighing room, stiff but not cracked through. It took almost an hour to trim it with her knife, dampen it with rainwater, and loop it where the belt should have been. Her fingers ached by the time she tied the last joint. "Just once," she whispered. "Show me what you remember." She pulled the handle. Nothing happened. She pulled again, harder. Pain sparked low in her belly. She stopped, breathing through it, angry at herself, and at every man who thought a woman's weakness began where her body carried life. Then she saw the brake pin. It had been pushed halfway in and painted over with dust. She kicked it loose with the heel of her boot. The wheel turned, not fast, not smooth. But it turned. A dry groan moved through the mill, and with it came a flutter from the chute, as if the old machine had coughed up something lodged in its throat. A scrap of paper slid onto the floor. Nora picked it up with both hands. The writing was faded, but clearer than the note in the bundle. A list of seed names, weights, dates, and initials filled the top half. Some were familiar: Dent corn, winter rye, field pea. Others meant nothing to her. At the bottom, under a line drawn twice, was a name that made her sit down hard on the scale stool. Mercy Red. Her grandmother had spoken those words once, years ago, on the last summer before fever took her. They had been shelling beans on the porch, and little Nora had complained that the work was dull. Her grandmother had gone still, one thumb resting over a red seed in her palm. Mercy Red fed us when men with papers said the ground owed them more than it owed children. Then she had closed her fist and said no more. Nora had thought it was a story about hunger. Old people had many of those. Now the name lay in her hand inside a mill the bank wanted back. A knock sounded at the open front wall. Nora spun around. An old farmer stood outside in the lowering light, hat crushed against his chest. She recognized him from the auction, the one who had laughed when she bid. His face looked different now. "I'm not here for Voss," he said quickly. Nora did not lower the knife. His eyes dropped to the paper in her hand, then to the north bin, then away, as if looking too long might cost him. "My wife's father used to bring seed here," he said, "before the bank changed the contracts. What do you want?" He swallowed. "If you found anything marked Mercy Red, don't say it in town." The name struck the air between them like a match. Nora stepped closer. "Why?" The old man looked back toward the road, where dust rose behind a wagon. "Because the last woman who said it out loud lost her farm by Christmas." Then he turned and walked away. She looked down at the paper again. Beside Mercy Red, in initials so small she almost missed them, someone wrote E. E. Her grandmother's name had been Esther Ellis. Nora did not sleep beside the north bin that night. She moved her blanket to the opposite wall, where she could see the front door, the sealed rear room, and the dark mouth of the machine. The paper marked Mercy Red and E. Stayed under her dress, flat against the skin above her heart. The seed pouch stayed under her hand. Every sound woke her. A board settling, a mouse in the wall, a wagon passing too slowly on the road. By dawn, fear had sharpened into work. The old farmer's warning had not told her to stop. It had told her the name mattered. She chose 12 kernels from the split bundle. Not the largest, not the prettiest. Her grandmother had taught her that pretty seed was sometimes only a shell with pride. Nora chose by weight, by the faint warmth of color beneath the dark coat, by the way each kernel rested in her palm, as if it had not given up. She found a shallow wooden drawer beneath the scale table and cleaned it with sand. Into it, she put soil scraped from beneath the loading chute, where the sun had not baked it to powder. She mixed in a little ash, because the old sacks had been packed that way for a reason, then poured 3 spoonfuls of rainwater from her cup. It was foolish to spend drinking water on seed. It was more foolish not to. She pressed each kernel down with her thumb and covered it lightly. "Hold until rain," she whispered. By mid-morning, the mill looked less like a grave and more like a place arguing with death. Nora patched the roof hole with a flour tin flattened under her heel. She hung sacks across the broken window to slow the dust. She dragged 2 boards over the worst gap in the floor and set a bucket under the drip from the beam. The work hurt. Her back burned. The child shifted whenever she bent too far. Twice, she had to sit on the scale stool and breathe until the room stopped tilting. But each repair changed the mill by 1 small inch, and 1 small inch was a kind of answer. Near noon, a shadow crossed the doorway. Nora reached for the knife. The old farmer from the road stood there again, both hands raised. "I only came to bring this," he said, a clay jar on the threshold. "What is it?" Nora asked. "Water, from my cistern. You laughed yesterday." His mouth tightened. "I did. Then why bring water?" He looked past her to the drawer on the table. His eyes did not touch it long, but long enough. "My bottom field is split open. I put bankseed in twice. Nothing held." He twisted his hat brim. "My wife's father used to say mercy red rooted deep. Said it waited out the devil himself if it had half a chance. You told me not to say the name. I told you not to say it in town." He stepped back as if the doorway itself might accuse him. "I'm saying it here because if you found it, Miss Ellis, you best know men have lost more than pride over that seed." "What men?" "Women first," he said quietly. Nora stilled. Before she could ask more, the farmer glanced toward the road and lowered his voice. "Voss's clerk came to my place last night. Asked whether I'd seen you carry anything from the mill. Asked whether I was behind on my note." "Are you?" His silence answered. Nora looked at the jar. "If you're afraid of him, why help me?" The farmer's eyes dropped to her belly, then away, ashamed. "Because my daughter is carrying too. And if next season belongs to the bank, none of our children will eat without permission." He left before she could thank him. Nora carried the jar inside and poured only a little into the drawer, careful as if feeding a sleeping child. The soil darkened, nothing moved, nothing promised. Still, she set the drawer in the strip of sun by the broken window. All afternoon, people passed the mill slower than before. A boy on a mule, 2 women with baskets, Caleb's man in a wagon that did not stop. Each pair of eyes seemed to count the boards she had moved, the sacks she had hung, the smoke from the cracked stove. By evening, Nora had sorted the remaining kernels into 3 piles, cracked, uncertain, and worth risking. She pried open one uncertain seed with her knife and held the split flesh close to the light. It was pale inside, not dead white, not hollow gray, pale like something waiting under skin. For the first time since Daniel left, Nora imagined a future longer than tomorrow. Not forgiveness, not comfort, just a pot of something grown by her own hands. A roof patched enough to hold a child who would not learn hunger as a first language. Then the smell came, sharp, bitter, wrong. Nora turned toward the drawer by the window. A dark stain spread across the soil. She crossed the room so fast, pain caught her side. Someone had reached through the broken window and poured something into the seedbed. The liquid glistened on the surface, oily and sour, eating into the ash-dark soil. "No," Nora breathed. She lifted the drawer, then stopped. Moving it would only drown the seeds deeper in poison. Her hands hovered, useless, furious. Outside, a wagon creaked down the road. Nora looked at the window. On the sill lay a strip of brown twine caught on a splinter. Not proof enough for a court. More than enough for a woman who had been asked to sign away contents, stock, and all associated materials. She carried the drawer to the door and tipped it gently, letting the poisoned topsoil slide off into the yard. Most of the seeds came with it, blackened and slick. She wanted to cry then, not softly, not with dignity. She wanted to make a sound big enough to shame the whole town. Instead, she knelt in the mud and searched. One kernel had caught in the corner where the drawer wood had warped. Then another. Then a third, half buried under clean ash below the poisoned layer. The shell had split. A white thread, thin as a hair, pushed from its side. Nora stared until the world narrowed to that single living point. Someone had tried to kill it before it could rise. But the seed had opened anyway. She covered the tiny root with clean soil, set it back inside the mill, and locked the door with both hands. Only then did she understand. Whoever had poisoned the drawer was not afraid of the ruined mill. They were afraid of what might grow in it. Nora did not take the sprouted seed to town. She wanted to. Every hungry part of her wanted to carry that tiny white root into the mercantile, lay it on the counter, and make Cedar Plain look at what it had called dead. But the strip of brown twine on the windowsill had taught her something sharper than pride. Proof shown too soon could be buried before it became evidence. So she wrapped the sprout in clean cloth, tucked it inside a cracked teacup near the stove, and chose 6 unsplit kernels from the pouch. Those she carried to market in the small seed bag her grandmother had sewn. The road into town passed fields that looked skinned. Cattle stood with their ribs showing. A windmill turned over a dry trough with a tired cough. Men watched Nora pass and pretended not to. Women looked at her shoes first, as if dust could tell them how low she had fallen. At the mercantile porch, Daniel Witt was not there. That should have comforted her. It did not. Nora went around back to the produce tables, where May Harlan sold onions, soap, salt pork, and whatever truth people were too ashamed to say indoors. May was near 60, square-shouldered, with gray hair pinned so tightly it seemed to pull every kindness back into her skull. Nora placed 1 coin on the table. "I need to ask about cloth." May did not look up. "Cloth is 2 stalls over." Old cloth. That made her look. Nora slid the corner of the seed bag from beneath her shawl, just enough to show the stitched mark. 3 bent lines crossing a small red thread. May's hand stopped over a crate of onions. Only for a second. Then she swept the coin off the table and pushed it back at Nora. "Put that away. Do you know it?" "I know enough not to point at a storm and call it weather." Nora leaned closer. "A man told me Mercy Red ruined women before it ruined men." May's face changed so quickly, Nora knew she had made a mistake. "Do not say that name here." "Why?" "Because some names still collect debt." May packed onions into a sack with hard, angry motions. "You think you bought a mill. Maybe you did. But if what you found is real, girl, you bought back a fight buried before you were born." The words entered Nora colder than wind. Before she could answer, a familiar voice behind her said, "Nora?" Her body knew the voice before her mind allowed it. Daniel Witt stood beside the hitching rail in a clean shirt, hair combed, face softened into the expression he used when he wanted forgiveness without earning it. He looked thinner than he had in spring, but not hungry. Never hungry. His eyes fell to her belly. "You look tired." "I am. I heard about the mill." He stepped closer. "I came as soon as I could. You knew where I was when the boarding house put me out." Shame crossed his face, but it did not stay long enough to be useful. "My mother was ill. Things were complicated. They were simple enough when you left." May said nothing, but Nora felt the older woman watching. Daniel lowered his voice. "Listen to me. Voss says that place is tangled in bank claims. You can't handle men like that alone." "I have handled men like that, by learning what they sound like when they lie." His jaw tightened. "I am trying to help you. Then start by saying why you came." For one breath, Daniel looked exactly like a boy caught with stolen apples. Then he smiled sadly. "Because our child deserves better than a collapsing mill. If there is value there, I can negotiate." As the father, the words struck harder than she expected. Father, a title he had abandoned until value appeared beside it. Nora picked up the seed bag. "You lost the right to speak for this child when your family sent my letter back unopened." Daniel's softness cracked. "Be careful, Nora. People already think you are unstable. Living alone out there, talking about old seed and poison. If Voss calls the county woman, what do you think she will see?" May's hand closed around a weighing iron. Nora's fear rose, but this time it met anger halfway. She will see a woman who bought walls when no one offered her a door. Daniel stared at her, as if she had answered in a language he had not known she possessed. May pushed a sack of onions into Nora's arms. These are bruised, no charge. Nora understood the gift and the warning both. Take food. Leave now. She did. Halfway down the road, she glanced back and saw Daniel speaking to a man beside the bank steps. Caleb Voss was not wearing his hat. He was smiling. The mill door hung open when Nora returned. For a moment, she could not move. The onion sack slipped from her arm and burst in the dirt. The new lock she had bought with her last small coin lay cut in two on the threshold. Inside, the room was not destroyed. That frightened her more. Whoever had entered had not searched wildly. The north bin was closed. The sprout cup sat untouched near the stove. The scale table had been wiped with a sleeve to remove dust prints. Then, Nora saw the machine ledger. It lay open beneath the seed cleaner, where she had hidden it under a loose board. She dropped to her knees and turned the pages fast. Weights, dates, initials. Mercy read, then a torn edge. One page had been cut clean from the back, so neatly that only a pale tooth of paper remained near the binding. Nora pressed her thumb against the empty place. Someone had not come to steal the seed. They had come to steal the page that explained who it belonged to. Rain came 2 nights after the page was stolen. It came hard, with wind that shoved dust ahead of it and hammered the mill roof until every patch Nora had made trembled. She woke to metal tearing loose above her and rolled from her blanket just before water poured where her head had been. The sprouted seed sat on the stove shelf in the cracked teacup. Nora reached it first. The roof groaned. Somewhere behind the north bins, wood split like a rifle shot. The child inside her kicked once. Nora pressed the teacup to her chest and backed away. Then the rear corner gave in. Not the whole mill. Only the old plank face behind the bins, the part she had marked as strange. Rain struck it from outside, and the wood peeled inward. Behind it was darkness. The hidden space was narrow, no wider than a pantry, but it ran behind the entire row of north bins. Inside, stacked on shelves made from seed crates, were linen sacks packed tight and gray with ash. Some were small enough to hold in one hand. Others were heavy, tied at the throat, and marked with red thread. Not one sack had been tossed there in haste. They had been stored. Nora set the teacup in the dry corner and pulled the first sack toward the light. On the tag, written in brown ink, were 3 words, Mercy Red Corn. Below them, in a careful hand, Hold until rain. She laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the note had known more patience than the living. The second sack held beans. The third held rye. The fourth, field peas. Each tag carried dates, weights, initials, and instructions for soil so dry ordinary seed failed before it could root. Ash for storage. Deep furrow. First, watering before dawn. Do not sell to contract agents. Contract agents. Nora read the words twice. At the back of the hidden space sat a wooden box with iron corners. It was not locked. Inside lay a ledger wrapped in oilcloth and folded papers. The ledger opened stiffly. The first page read, Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative. Nora stopped. The storm battered the mill around her, but her whole life narrowed to that line of ink. Women's Seed Cooperative. Not a company. Not a bank stockroom. Not abandoned trash. A cooperative. She turned the page and found names. Dozens of them. Written in different hands. Wives. Widows. Daughters. Farm women whose surnames Nora had heard muttered as old failures. Beside each name was a crop, a measure, a season saved. Then she saw it. Esther Ellis. Her grandmother's name stood near the middle of the page, beside Mercy Red, with a note in the margin. Keeps germination record by hand. Best eye for living stock. Nora pressed 2 fingers over the name. For years, Esther Ellis had been a woman with a cough, a seed pouch, and sayings people called old country nonsense. Now, the ledger told Nora those sayings had not been scraps of memory. They had been tools, instructions, evidence. Her grandmother had not been remembering poverty. She had been remembering resistance. The papers told their story in numbers before words. In the first years, farmers brought seed to the mill, cleaned it, weighed it, and took home enough to plant again. Then the bank attached seed purchases to loans. Then came contracts forbidding families to save seed, then late fees, then inspections, then repossessions. One notice from Voss Bank, signed by Caleb's father, accused the cooperative of interfering with agricultural credit stability. A reply in a woman's hand answered, "No child should have to borrow next year's bread." This was why the mill had been made to look dead. This was why the belt had been cut, the bins sealed, the back room nailed from inside. The women had not failed and vanished. They had hidden what they could not defend. And now it was in her hands. A wagon stopped outside. Nora blew out the lamp. "Miss Ellis?" Caleb Voss called. "I saw damage from the road. I came to make sure you were not hurt." No man rode through a storm to check on a woman he had threatened unless the storm had uncovered something he wanted. Nora gathered the ledger, the packet of papers, and the mercy red tag into the oilcloth. She shoved them beneath the loose board under the scale table, then pulled an empty sack over the hidden opening. The door opened before she reached it. Caleb stood in the frame with rain shining on his black coat. Behind him, his clerk held a lantern and looked at the broken wall. Before he looked at Nora, that was all she needed to see. "You should not enter without permission," Nora said. Caleb removed his hat slowly. "A collapsed wall changes certain responsibilities. It is my wall. If it endangers you, the county may disagree." His eyes moved past her. What fell? Rot. And nothing else? Rain. The clerk raised the lantern. Its light touched the ash, the broken planks, the edge of one linen sack Nora had not covered. Caleb's face changed. Only for a breath, but Nora saw it. Hunger, not surprise. "Old seed," he said softly. "Looks like dust to me. Mercy red does, until water touches it." The words left his mouth before caution could catch them. Nora had never said the name to him. May had warned her not to say it in town. The old farmer had whispered it like a sin. Daniel could have spoken, perhaps, but Daniel did not know what the sacks looked like. Caleb did. Nora tilted her head. "How do you know that name?" Caleb's smile returned, but now it had seams. Every banker in farm country knows old varieties. Sentimental farmers are always inventing value. "Then you won't mind if I keep sentimental dust." "I mind you endangering yourself over something you do not understand." "Then explain it." He stepped closer. $35 was generous yesterday. Tonight I can make it 50, and I can have a doctor meet you in town before morning. And in return, the mill, its contents, any seed, records, or agricultural remnants inside it. Records. Caleb knew about the records too. The clerk shifted his lantern, and light flashed across the scale table. Water crept toward the loose board where the ledger lay hidden. If the oilcloth failed, the ink could run before dawn. "I said no yesterday," she said, "and I admired the courage of it yesterday. Tonight, it looks less like courage and more like neglect. A child has rights before it is born." There it was. Not concern. A leash. Nora put one hand over her belly. This child will not begin life with its mother's name on a surrender paper. For the first time, Caleb's eyes cooled completely. "Then keep your ruin," he said. "But understand this. If anything in here belonged to the repossessed mill, the bank has claim. If you remove it, you steal. If you distribute it, you commit fraud. And if you plant unapproved stock, you may find every sick field in this county laid at your feet." He paused at the door. "My father spent years cleaning up the trouble women made in this place. I will not let one frightened girl start it again." The door shut behind him. Nora stood in the dark, shaking. Not from fear alone. From answer. Women. He had said women. She waited until the wagon rolled away before she crossed to the scale table and pulled up the loose board. The oilcloth was damp but sealed. The ledger was safe. She opened it again, searching for the page that would tell her who had legal right to the stock now. The back cover gaped. The final page had been cut out, cleanly. The same way the machine ledger had been cut, the seed could feed them, the records could free them. But the page that proved both had already been stolen. By sunrise, Cedar Plain already knew a version of the story Caleb wanted told. Nora learned it from the woman in the blue county bonnet, who arrived with a notebook, a pressed mouth, and Daniel Witt standing 3 steps behind her like a witness pretending not to enjoy his duty. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Albright from the county charitable office. She looked at the broken roof before she looked at Nora. She looked at the stove, the patched window, the stack of seed sacks covered with a flour cloth, and finally at the place where Nora's dress stretched over the child. "We received a concern," Mrs. Albright said. "A concern has a name," Nora answered. Daniel shifted. "Nora, don't make this harder." She did not look at him. "Then, it does have a name." Mrs. Albright's pencil hovered over the paper. "There are questions about whether this structure is suitable for confinement and infant care." Confinement. The word made the mill seem smaller. Nora had faced hunger, gossip, and men at her door. But this was different. This was not a threat to her roof. This was a hand reaching toward the child inside her, wrapped in official language. "I bought walls when the town gave me none," Nora said. "If the county is worried about shelter, it can ask why every clean room in Cedar Plain closed its door before I came here." Daniel stepped forward. "I offered to help. You offered to sign for me." His face flushed. Mrs. Albright glanced between them. Not blind, but careful in the way people were careful around banks. "Mr. Voss says there may be unsafe agricultural materials stored here. Chemicals. Spoiled grain. Possible contamination." Nora almost laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because poison had been poured through her window. And now the poison had become her accusation. "You may inspect the open room," she said. "You may not touch my papers or my seed." "Your seed?" Daniel asked too quickly. Nora turned on him. "That word interested you." He looked away. Mrs. Albright wrote something down. After they left, Nora found 2 fresh wagon tracks by the broken window. One set stopped where the poisoned drawer had stood. The other crossed to the rear wall and back, deep enough to show the wagon had carried weight when it left. She went to the hidden space. 3 sacks were missing. Not Mercy Red. Not the ledger. Smaller sacks from the lower shelf. The ones marked field pea and drought rye. The thief had taken enough to test, not enough to reveal the theft at first glance. On the shelf, where the sacks had been, someone had left a torn scrap of newspaper. At first, she thought it was packing. Then she saw the print. "Uninspected seed may endanger county crops." No date, no source. Only a headline waiting to become rumor. By noon, the rumor had legs. The company man came before the old farmer did. He wore city boots and carried a canvas sample case as if he were a doctor called to examine a sick animal. "Pritchard Seed Company," he said, offering a card Nora did not take. "We have reports of unauthorized germination." "Seeds germinate," Nora said. "That is what the Lord made them to do, not without certification." He looked toward the covered sacks. "If a blight appears after unapproved stock leaves this building, liability could follow the source. The source of blight is often men who profit from fear." His smile was thin as paper. "Fear is cheaper than famine, Miss Ellis." He left a red notice on the door. "Quarantine review pending." Now even the children stopped daring one another to touch the mill. A boy shouted it from the road. "Miss Ellis is growing poison corn." By afternoon, 2 women crossed themselves when passing the mill. By evening, the old farmer who had brought water came no farther than the loading chute. "My note comes due Monday," he said, eyes fixed on the dirt. "Voss sent word. If I take seed from you, he'll call the balance." "You came to warn me?" "I came to say I'm sorry." Sorry feeds no field. The words hurt him. Good. They hurt her too. He removed his hat. "There's something else. The new contracts. They ain't just for loans anymore." He pulled a folded copy from inside his shirt and passed it to her with shaking fingers. "My daughter signed one after her husband took sick. I should have read it better." Nora spread it on the scale table after he left. The language ran narrow and mean across the page. "Borrower agrees not to retain, store, exchange, distribute, or propagate seed stock outside approved purchase channels." There it was. Not farming. Permission. She read further and found the clause Caleb had hinted at. All agricultural stock discovered on repossessed property may be reviewed for prior claim, contamination, or commercial infringement. Commercial infringement. A farmer could lose his land for saving tomorrow from today. Nora copied the clause onto the back of an old seed tag. Her handwriting shook only at first. Near dusk, the clerk who had come with Caleb rode up alone. His name, Nora had learned from market whispers, was Silas Pike. He was young, narrow-faced, and too thin for the coat he wore. He did not dismount. "Miss Ellis," he said, "I was never here." "Then you are doing a poor job of it." He swallowed and tossed a small cloth packet onto the ground. "Those were taken last night. Mr. Voss told me to burn them." Nora picked it up. Inside were 20 or 30 seeds, mixed and dusty. "Why didn't you?" Silas looked toward town. "My father kept seed once. Voss called it theft. We lost 40 acres and a mule before I turned 12. Yet you work for him. Debt hires a man before conscience wakes up." He pulled his reins. "He does not need the judge to own that mill. He only needs folks afraid to stand near you." Then he rode away. Nora stood in the yard with the stolen seed in her palm as the last light thinned across the fields. Behind her, the mill held its broken breath. Before her, the town had begun closing itself like a fist. That night, she did not hide the ledger beneath the floor. She wrapped it in oilcloth, tied it under her dress, and slept sitting against the door with the broom across her lap. Just before dawn, a paper slid under the threshold. Nora waited until the footsteps left before she touched it. It was not from Caleb. The handwriting was May Harlan's. "If you want to know who owned the last page, come after dark. Bring ash. Bring a lamp. Trust no man who offers to carry either." May did not come through the front door. Nora heard the signal just after dark. 3 taps against the rear wall, a pause, then one more. Not loud enough for the road, too deliberate for wind. She took the lamp in one hand, the ash bowl in the other, and kept the knife tucked beneath her sleeve. Outside, May Harlan stood under the broken loading chute, with a tin box pressed to her chest. Rain had left the yard soft, and she had wrapped burlap around her shoes to hide her tracks. "You came alone?" May asked. "So did you." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I trust." For the first time, May almost smiled. They did not speak again until the door was barred behind them. May looked around the mill, not like a stranger seeing ruin, but like a daughter entering a sick room. Her eyes moved from the north bins to the seed cleaner, then to the place where the wall had broken and the hidden shelves waited under flour cloth. "My mother said this place had a second heart," she whispered. "I thought grief had made her fanciful." Nora set the lamp on the scale table. "Your mother was part of it?" May opened the tin box. Inside lay folded cloth, a rusted measuring spoon, a strip of red thread, and a small notebook tied with blue ribbon. "Eliza Harlan," May said, "widow before 30, could grow beans in ground men, had already cursed. She helped keep the germination records after your grandmother's eyes went bad." Nora touched the ledger beneath her dress. "You knew Esther Ellis?" "I knew of her. My mother spoke her name the way some women speak of a preacher, and some speak of a loaded gun." That should have made Nora laugh. Instead, her throat tightened. May unfolded the cloth from the tin. Stitched in one corner was the same mark from Nora's seed bag. 3 bent lines and a red crossing thread. "It was not decoration," May said. "It meant seed held in common. No woman owned all of it. No man could sell it without all the names." Then, the stolen page would have said who held the stock after the bank tried to shut them down. "Do you have it?" May's hand closed over the notebook, but she did not give it over. "I have what my mother copied, but before I show you, understand me. If you plan to sell those sacks to Voss and buy yourself a clean room, do it without my dead mother's hand helping you." Nora felt the words strike, because some frightened part of her had imagined exactly that. A doctor, a bed, a door that locked without a broom across it. "I am scared," she said. "You should be. I am hungry. I know. My child may come before this is over." May's face softened, but her voice did not. "Then decide what kind of world the child comes into. One where bread is borrowed from a bank, or one where seed remembers who saved it." The mill seemed to lean closer around them. Nora looked at the hidden sacks, the broken roof, the teacup where the sprout bent toward the lamp. "Show me." May untied the blue ribbon. The notebook held copies in a tight, slanted hand. Dates, names, measures, agreements. The final entry had been copied under the title Emergency Holding Clause. Nora bent over it. "If the mill is seized, living stock shall remain under the protection of named keepers and their descendants until the cooperative is restored by public witness." Named keepers. May turned the page. There were 6 names. Eliza Harlan was 3rd. Esther Ellis was 5th. Nora put one hand against the table to steady herself. "Descendants. You," May said. "Me, if courage has not skipped a generation. But Voss will say, a copy means nothing. He will. That is why my mother copied where the original was hidden." May pointed to the north bin. Inside the lid, Nora stared. The lid was searched. The top was. Men look where paper lies flat. Women hide where hands must work. Together they dragged the bin lid down from its hinges. The underside was dark with old oil. At first, Nora saw nothing but scratches and fresh, pale scars where someone had scraped with a blade. May's mouth hardened. He found it. Nora lifted the lamp closer. Not all of it. The scraped wood still held grooves, shallow as veins. May took the ash bowl and rubbed gray powder across the underside. Nora held the lamp low, letting light strike from the side the way her grandmother used to check cracked seed. Letters rose from the damage, not ink. Pressure. The hand that had written the clause had pressed hard enough to bruise the wood beneath the oil. May read first, voice breaking on her mother's name, quote. Nora read after. Slow, making every word enter her. Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative shall not be dissolved by bank seizure, debt transfer, private sale, or forced abandonment. The room went silent. Outside, a horse snorted. Nora pinched the lamp wick lower. May closed the notebook. Both women listened. A rider waited on the road beyond the mill, hidden where the moon did not reach. May leaned close enough that Nora felt her breath. Now you know why Voss stole the page. Nora looked at the words rising from ash on the wounded wood. The cooperative had not died. It had been waiting for a witness. The rider on the road did not move until May left. Nora watched through a crack in the wall as the horse turned toward town, slow enough to pretend it had not been waiting. By sunrise, a notice was nailed to the mercantile door, the church post, and the mill itself. Public review of unsafe seed activity. Cedar Plain Community Hall. 4 o'clock. Caleb had chosen the hour well. Late enough for the fields to empty. Early enough for every frightened family to hear judgment before supper. Nora spent the morning preparing what could not be hidden anymore. She wrapped the sprouted mercy red in damp cloth and set it inside a small wooden crate. She tied the cooperative ledger under her shawl. May's copied clause went into her grandmother's seed pouch, beside the kernels that had started all of it. The bin lid, too large to carry alone, was loaded onto the old farmer's wagon after he came without meeting her eyes. I can haul it, he said. I cannot speak. Why not? His mouth worked once before sound came. Voss sent a man to my daughter's place. Said her note could be called before the baby comes. Nora looked at his hands. They were cracked from years of soil, and they shook like he was ashamed of being alive. Then haul the lid, she said. If your voice is chained, let the wood speak. The community hall smelled of dust, wool, and fear. Every bench was full. Farmers stood along the walls with hats in their hands. Women gathered near the back, whispering into their gloves. Daniel sat in front beside Mrs. Albright, dressed like a man who expected to be thanked for his concern. Caleb Voss stood at the long table with the company man from Pritchard Seed. Beside them lay papers, seals, and one neat green folder. The sight of that folder made Nora's stomach tighten. Caleb began before she reached the table. Miss Ellis is young, frightened, and in difficult circumstances, he said to the room. No decent person can fail to pity her. But pity does not make bad seed safe, nor does desperation create ownership. A murmur moved through the hall. Nora set the crate on the table. Then let us talk about ownership. Caleb's gaze dropped to the crate. You brought contaminated material into a public building? I brought a living plant. The Pritchard man opened his folder. Uncertified germination stock. Nora unfolded the damp cloth. The tiny mercy red sprout leaned into the hall light. Pale root wrapped in dark soil. Green tip no longer than a sewing needle. People leaned forward before they could stop themselves. Caleb recovered first. A sprout proves nothing except recklessness. It proves the seed is alive. It may also prove the source of future crop damage. He lifted a stamped document. Furthermore, the mill from which this material was taken was repossessed agricultural property. Under prior claim language, residual stock and associated records fall under bank review. There it was. The first wall. He passed the paper to the town clerk. The clerk read silently, face closing. Nora took out the cooperative ledger. The seed was not bank stock. It was held by the Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative. Laughter came from one side of the room. Nervous, not amused. Caleb smiled gently. A charming phrase. Is this cooperative currently registered? It was never legally dissolved. Can you prove that with an original final page? The second wall rose in front of her. Nora felt the room shift. Caleb had named the missing piece, without pretending ignorance. He wanted the people to hear absence as guilt. The final page was stolen, she said. Convenient. Daniel stood. Nora, please, this is hurting you. Let me take you home. The word home cut through the hall like a cruel joke. Nora turned to him. You had a home to offer when my suitcase was on the road. You did not offer it. His face reddened. I am thinking of the child. No. You are thinking of the man who told you there was value in the mill. A few women in the back went still. Caleb tapped the table. Personal grievances will not make evidence. No, Nora said, but your own tongue might. She opened May's notebook to the copied emergency clause, then pointed to the bin lid leaning against the wall. The old farmer and Silas Pike carried it forward together. The room stirred at the sight of Silas in daylight. No bank coat, no hat. His face pale with fear. Caleb's voice hardened. Mr. Pike, consider your employment. Silas looked at Nora, then at the farmers along the wall. I already have. They set the lid across two chairs. May stepped forward with the ash bowl and lamp. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at the women in the room. My mother copied this because she knew men would steal paper first. She rubbed ash across the scraped underside. Nora lowered the lamp to the angle they had practiced. The letters rose, wounded but legible. Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative shall not be dissolved by bank seizure, debt transfer, private sale, or forced abandonment. The hall fell silent enough for the lamp flame to whisper. Caleb gave a soft laugh. A scratched board is not a charter. No, Nora said. It is a copy of the clause. The ledger is the charter. The seed is the stock. And your contracts are the reason it was hidden. She took out the farmer's loan paper and read the line forbidding families to retain, exchange, or propagate seed outside approved channels. Men along the wall began to look at one another. They had signed the same words. Some had never read them aloud. The Pritchard man interrupted. Modern seed control protects yield stability. Then why did your company send men to destroy old sacks before testing them? Nora asked. He blinked. Silas reached into his coat and placed the returned seed packet on the table. Mr. Voss told me to burn this. Caleb turned on him. You stole from the bank. No, Nora said. He returned what was stolen from the mill. A farmer at the wall lifted his head. The old man who had brought water. Nora waited, hoping he would speak. His lips parted. Then he saw Caleb looking at him, and the man's courage folded. I know nothing, he whispered. The words struck Nora harder than Daniel's. Without a farmer willing to say the contracts had trapped them, Caleb could still paint her as a desperate girl with old wood and a sprout. Mrs. Albright stood halfway. Miss Ellis, perhaps this should be delayed until after your confinement. Delayed means buried, Nora said. Caleb seized the opening. This is precisely my concern. Miss Ellis is in no condition to manage hazardous property, unknown seed, or legal proceedings. For the child's welfare, a temporary guardian of the property and materials may be advisable. Daniel stepped forward too quickly. I would serve. The room turned toward him. Nora felt fear rush up so fast she almost reached for the table. Then the child moved, hard and certain, beneath her hand. She straightened. No man who abandoned this child gets to use it as a key. May put the tin box on the table. The sound was small. The room heard it. There is one more copy, May said. Not copied by my mother. Signed by Caleb Voss's father when he tried to settle with the women and failed. Caleb went white. Nora looked at him and saw the mistake before he made it. You cannot have Esther Ellis's settlement paper, he said. Nora had never told the room Esther's name. May opened the tin box herself. No one in the hall breathed loudly enough to hide the sound of the lid. Inside lay a folded paper, brown at the edges, tied with red thread so old it had faded almost pink. May placed it in Nora's hands, but she did not step in front of her. This is yours to read, she said. Esther kept seed. My mother kept the copy. You brought them both back into the light. Nora untied the thread. Her hands shook. She let them. The room had seen her hungry, pregnant, mocked, threatened, and cornered. It could see her hands shake and still hear her voice. The paper was a settlement agreement, written in the stiff language of men who believed neat sentences could bury dirty work. It named Voss Bank. It named Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative. It named 6 keepers, including Eliza, Harlan, and Esther Ellis. It acknowledged that living seed stock held in the mill was not collateral, not commercial inventory, and not subject to private bank seizure. At the bottom was the signature of Caleb's father. Beside it, in darker ink, was a line added by Esther Ellis, received under protest. No woman here agrees to surrender bread. The hall changed after that. Not loudly, no one cheered. The first change was smaller. A woman in the back removed her glove and pressed it to her mouth. A farmer who had stared at his boots lifted his head. Mrs. Albright lowered her pencil. Caleb reached for the paper. That document is private bank property. Nora pulled it back. Then you admit it is real. His face tightened. The town clerk asked to see it. Caleb objected. May objected to his objection. Silas stepped forward and said he had been ordered to search the mill for records, not rot. The Pritchard man closed his green folder as if it had suddenly become too heavy to carry. Then the old farmer spoke. Not loudly, but enough. Voss Bank called my daughter's note because I asked about Mercy Red. Another man stood. Mine says I can't save seed from my own field. A third voice came from the back. My mother had that red thread mark on a flour sack. The room, which Caleb had tried to close around Nora, opened one witness at a time. Caleb did not collapse. Men like him rarely did. He gathered himself, straightened his coat, and spoke of review, authenticity, jurisdiction, contamination, and delay. He tried to turn the meeting into fog, but fog could not cover everything. The clerk refused to grant the bank temporary control of the mill. Mrs. Albright withdrew her recommendation about guardianship after Nora invited her to inspect the repaired sleeping corner herself. The council ordered the quarantine notice suspended until independent testing could be arranged. More important, the clerk agreed to seal copies of the ledger, the settlement paper, the bin lid clause, and the contracts before Caleb could touch them again. It was not a full victory. Nora understood that before anyone else did. Caleb still had money, lawyers, and half the county's debts in his drawers. The mill still leaked. The hidden seed was not enough for every field. One living sprout did not end a drought. But for the first time, Caleb left a room without taking the truth with him. At the door, Daniel tried one last time. Nora, he said, softer now, you don't have to do this alone. She looked at him for a long moment. Once, those words might have saved her. Now, they sounded like a man asking to enter a house he had refused to help build. I know, she said. That is why I am not choosing you. She walked out with May on one side, and Silas carrying the bin lid on the other. Behind them came the old farmer with the crate of Mercy Red, then Mrs. Albright with the sealed copies, then 3 women Nora barely knew carrying jars of water as if they were candles. By the time they reached the mill, dusk had turned the broken windows gold. No one called it dead. They set the seed back on the shelves. They lifted boards over the roof holes. Someone brought nails. Someone brought a kettle. Someone swept the floor while Nora stood beside the north bin, one hand on her child, the other on the old seed pouch. She had not won money. She had not won ease. She had won witnesses. And when she looked toward the road, more people were coming, each carrying something the mill needed to live. 3 weeks after the hearing, the mill still leaked when rain came sideways. That was the first thing Nora learned about victory. It did not mend roofs by itself. It did not fill empty shelves or turn one sprout into a harvest overnight. It arrived small, tired, and carrying a hammer. Every morning, someone came. The old farmer brought boards from a collapsed corn crib and worked without asking forgiveness again. Silas Pike came after quitting the bank, wearing the same thin coat but standing straighter without Caleb's ledger under his arm. Mrs. Albright returned with clean linen, a cradle mattress, and a look that said she had been wrong but did not yet know how to say it gracefully. May came most days before sunrise. She brought the tin box, the copied notes, and the kind of silence that did not demand thanks. Together, she and Nora sorted the hidden stock by name, year, and strength. Mercy Red went on the highest shelf, not because it was precious like jewelry, but because it belonged where hands could reach it carefully. They tested nothing in haste. Nora would not let fear make her waste what patience had saved. She soaked 3 kernels at a time, planted 6, recorded every crack in every seed coat. May wrote the dates. Nora wrote the weather. When a seed failed, they kept the note. When one lived, they marked the tag with red thread. The first public planting was not grand. It happened behind the mill, in a strip of soil no wider than a wagon bed. 12 people stood around it, as if attending a funeral or a birth, unsure which face to wear. Nora pressed the mercy red kernels into the earth herself. No banker spoke over her. No man signed for her hand. When she covered the furrow, May poured water from a blue jar that had belonged to her mother. "Common stock," May said. Nora answered, "Common bread." By the second week, the tiny plants had risen in a row, thin and stubborn against the brown world. People started coming with jars, names, and apologies that did not always know where to stand. Some wanted seed immediately. Nora refused them, not unkindly. "You cannot save a county by spending the last handful," she said. "First, we grow enough that no one has to beg." The words traveled farther than she expected. Caleb Voss did not vanish. Men like him became quieter before they became gone. Investigators came from the county seat. The town clerk sealed more copies. Pritchard Seed sent 2 letters full of threat and received 1 letter back from 6 farmers, 3 widows, May Harlan, Silas Pike, and Nora Ellis, all signed beneath the restored name of the cooperative. The letters stopped after that. Daniel left Cedar Plain before the first corn blade reached Nora's knee. He sent no farewell. Nora felt the wound, but it no longer directed her steps. Some abandonments remained part of the weather. You learned to build with the wind in mind. The child came on a gray morning when thunder rolled low but no rain fell. Nora was in the weighing room, arguing with May about whether the rye records belonged in a separate ledger, when the first pain bent her over the scale table. For a moment, fear took her back to the night water dripped on her blanket, and she had wondered if the mill had been a mistake. Then May put one arm around her and called through the door. The mill filled with women. Mrs. Albright boiled water. The old farmer's daughter brought clean towels. May held Nora's hand and told her, when the pain was worst, that living seed knew when to break open. Near dusk, Nora's daughter was born under the repaired roof of the mill that had been called dead. They laid the baby in a cradle Silas had made from the soundboards of the old north bin. He had sanded away the scars, but left one small mark on the side. 3 bent lines crossed with red thread. Nora named her Esther May. No one laughed. By harvest, the strip behind the mill had turned red gold. It was not enough to feed Cedar Plain, not yet, but it was enough to prove the next season existed. The cooperative opened its doors on the first cool morning of autumn. The sign above the entrance was painted by a woman who had once crossed the street to avoid Nora. It read, Cedar Plain Women's Seed Cooperative. Living stock held in common. Inside, the bins were clean. The belt wheel turned. The ledger lay open on the scale table, with old names copied beside new ones. Esther Ellis, Eliza Harlan, Nora Ellis, May Harlan. Silas Pike signed only as witness, because he said some histories needed men to stand aside without disappearing. Nora stood in the doorway with her daughter asleep against her shoulder, and watched farmers line up, not to borrow, but to receive and return. The mill did not make her rich. It gave her something harder to steal: a place, a name, a season after ruin. And when wind moved through the bins that evening, the sound was no longer like fingernails trapped behind wood. It sounded like seed waiting for spring.